How's it going? Welcome to our podcast. So I am James Aikman, president of Aikman Wildlife Adventure.
I am his brother, Andrew Aikman, executive vice president here at Aikman Wildlife.
So what was it like growing up in the Aikman household? So there's three brothers. So Bobby, our youngest brother, is not here with us today, but he was a part of it. I don't know. I would say that we were always building stuff, creating stuff. Jurassic Park was huge for us, so we took over our parents' pool table and built another 4x8 table, and was always doing scenery and habitats and recreating the best we could the Jurassic Park island for all of our toys to play with.
Well, yeah, there was one year we brought snow down into the basement, so we could do an ice age type of thing.
We wanted to have an ice age thing, and
that lasted about an hour.
So excited to get snow in there. We weren't thinking about the fact that, well, it's gonna melt when you bring it in the house. So I think we left for lunch and came back, and
I don't think Dad was too happy.
Our ice age
with that
was now a pond.
Greenhouse effect.
Other than that, fairly normal. We love playing with all kinds of different action figures and toys, as well as animals. Had a lot of different toy animals. Yeah, we had a lot of different pets while we were building our house we moved into. When I was in junior high, we lived with my grandparents. We had a petting zoo out there. I think we had guinea pigs, rabbits, hermit crabs, frogs, toads.
Our main sign was made out of drywall,
and
it was raining the day that we opened, so by the end of within 2 hours, the sign was pretty much just a pile of...
But we did have one family come out, so we had one family, and...
What did we even charge for that?
I don't know, if it was like $2 a person.
Yeah.
Maybe, so...
So in a way, that's the origin of Aikman Wildlife. The tiny little petting zoo full of guinea pigs.
In the back of our grandparents' garage.
Yeah. How old would we have been? You said you were in junior high? So
I think I was going into 7th grade, so I'd have probably been like
5th grade?
13. We had garter snakes too.
We had a lot of garter snakes.
Yeah.
Especially when they had babies.
Yep, we had a pair of garter snakes, gave birth to 25 babies. And if you don't know about garter snakes, they do not lay eggs. They give birth to live babies. So I came into my room one day and it looked like just a bunch of snot piles all over the habitat. And then we realized there were baby snakes all over. So.
Well, the biggest thing about the garter snakes is, to this day, Mom thinks that James planted a garter snake in their shower, but James is adamant that did not happen.
Yeah.
Right?
I did not do it. I love to joke and I love to tease, and at this point, if I would have done that, I would take credit for it. But they can always know if I'm telling the truth if I say I promise. If I say I promise, I do not lie, and so I promise I had nothing to do with that snake in the bathroom.
It's just a little background. Our dad is terrified of snakes, so absolutely terrified. So is Bobby too.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Both of them are very afraid.
Yeah.
And so Dad was probably looking over his back every time he went to the bathroom from that point.
Yeah, it's just a little strange that it popped up in that bathroom.
Yeah. But overall, fairly normal growing up, aside from the fact that we loved to fight with swords, and that was something that continued on as we got older. The swords got more real. I think you and Bobby even went through a phase where you were getting each other a sword for every holiday, so birthday, Christmas, but I think also brought in Arbor Day into it, and
yeah, I mean that only lasted like one season, but they got a little nuts there.
So
had a fairly large collection.
Just typical boy stuff.
Random swords.
So,
I mean, we played sports and stuff like that also. I mean, it's not a big part of our...
yeah, so football, basketball, track, different things like that. But pretty much, other than the random petting zoo we had at our grandparents' house, nothing really was happening that would have ever made us think we would be here.
No, I mean, for the most part, it was normal cats, dogs, occasional guinea pig, garter snake, and that was about it.
Had no desire on anyone's part to have a wildlife park. Thought wasn't even in our minds at that time. So
No, so I mean, you went to school for basically financing, business financing. I went to school for construction, kind of more engineering aspects. So I mean, other than just enjoying animals and, you know, enjoying going to the zoo, or when we were young, we went to that drive-through wildlife park down in Missouri that really stuck with us. That was probably our one and only, I guess, encounter with a drive-through component when it comes to the wildlife park. So that always stuck with us. But definitely both me and him, we did not go to school for animals or animal related. Kind of just everything fell into place almost to a certain extent.
yeah, so that so kind of touching on that.
A lot less stressful, probably.
So again, my background was business and finance, and so I was a banker for 10 years before I did this. Was married.
Still are married.
Didn't have any kids at the time until had the dreams for it. And you were living in Terre Haute and working at a...
Yeah, so I was working at a big landscaping place doing kind of computer-generated design work for that company. Again, not having any inkling of, other than having a pet dog. I have 3 of them actually, or I had 3 of them. That was about it in terms of when it came to animals and interacting
we
with
had
animals.
2 cats. That was all we did.
So before Aikman Wildlife, it was very non-animal related type of life, kind of just your normal working on the weekdays, enjoying the evenings, not having to work on holidays and weekends.
So we decided
So,
to trade that all in. So then on the night of October 22nd, 2013, I had a dream that my wife and I owned and operated a wildlife park. I told her about it the next day. Her response was, "You are crazy. Our son's going to be born in about a few weeks, and we have enough on our plate, so you need to get that out of your head." I agreed with her completely. That night I had the exact same dream, told her about it the next day, said, "I don't know why, but I feel like this is something God's wanting us to do." And she said, "Well, if God's behind it, he'll find a way to make it happen." So from there, my mind just started becoming flooded with thoughts and plans and ideas and layouts. Doors started opening. At one point, I knew that I needed to let him know. At the time, I wasn't even thinking about my family being involved. Andy is the pessimist of the family, so he will call himself a realist, but
That's what it is.
he is a pessimist. So I knew if I could convince him, then I could convince anyone that this was a good idea for me to do. And the Friday night after Thanksgiving of 13 is when our family usually has Thanksgiving together. And my wife and I could not be there because we were in the hospital. She was giving birth to our son. I had told my parents about it. I had not told him yet. They told him something. And then first week of December, we were actually having all meeting at Yoder's to have dinner. And I walk into the back room. He's already there. And one of the first things he says to me is, "What's this about a stupid zoo?" And so I told him.
I don't know if that's the exact words that I used or not.
I'm pretty sure that was verbatim.
I'm pretty sure Mom and Dad did not word it how they were supposed to. If that was my response.
Absolutely. So I told him, just wait till after dinner and I'll kind of show you what I've been working on. And so his response was, "This isn't what Mom and Dad described." And so from there, him and I started doing a lot more emailing back and forth, texting back and forth. His background with AutoCAD, computer generated drawings.
That's when hours upon hours
huge
started in terms of conversations, being on a computer, designing. I don't know how many, we probably went through 100 different designs. What we initially were going to do was basically buy a piece of farm ground, terraform it to exactly how we wanted the park to look. So even all the way down to tree placement, everything like that, design it from scratch, put hills where we wanted them to, and all this stuff. So we went through, what would that have been, at least a year of just going back and forth, designing different layouts.
So it was about 22 months from when I had the dreams to when we actually bought this property. And so during that period, we thought we had a lead on probably 4 or 5 different pieces of land during that time period. And things just kept falling through with each of those. That's kind of probably what took the longest. Why that took 22 months from the dreams to purchasing the property is just farm ground around here is, one, it's very good farm ground. 2, the Amish community is always looking for land to buy for their kids to live on and build on. So asking people to part with land around here is asking people to part with their firstborn son. And when kind of the last land option fell through, we realized that was not going to work for us. Then we did kind of turn our sights back to Rockland Garden. We had known about that a little bit earlier, but it seemed like a massive undertaking to have something that was already here and established and turn it into our wildlife park.
Well, it was a little bit of a gut check for me, because literally all the designs that we drew was for a blank piece of land, and to just completely throw all of that away was
really on that note, it wasn't just drawings on the computer, because you had done a scale model, a 1/220 scale model of what that bare 40 acres was going to turn into. And so that meant the 200 plus hours that went into that.
Yeah, I don't like to talk about it very much, because it was a lot of work to do that, and we did it for a expo that we have here locally, just to kind of get our vision out to the locals, so they knew kind of what we were thinking, what the direction of the park was we were wanting to go into. And so that was done, and then probably about 2 months after that expo is when we decided that piece of land that was designed around was not going to be an option. And we circled back to Rockland Gardens property and kind of really looked at it. That's when I came out, started to kind of get all the measurements for all the existing buildings and kind of map that back into AutoCAD, so then we could try to see how we could get our vision from what was here. So basically everything leading up to that point, other than kind of key elements that we could take from those existing old original plans and incorporate them into the new design, everything else was pretty much scrapped. So it was, for lack of a better term, pretty much starting over from a design standpoint, and kind of, we at least knew what the basics were. We knew that we were going to have, a wagon adventure. So we knew we had to have some sort of way to get wagons from the public side after the drive-through. So we had some of the basic components that I guess made it a little easier trying to figure out how to incorporate that into this piece of property. But it was a little depressing, to say the least. I had some choice words after you told me that, hey, I don't think that property is going to work out. So
we did have to definitely think outside of the box. We kind of had to visualize. Both of us are very good at visualizing. So once we kind of figured out what the plan would be at Rockholm, the property that we bought, we could kind of walk through it and see it as if it was already done. Not everyone can do that, so we are thankful that we're able to do that, and then kind of putting that plan onto the AutoCAD so others could kind of see the layout. But one interesting fact that most people probably have no clue about our park is that our drive-through component was always going to have curves in it, different things like that. But our walkthrough was originally going to look much different. And actually, I think we've got going off script here. So this is a picture of what the park was going to look like. So you can see the drive-through around it, but the walkthrough side has very like hexagons, kind of edges.
Basically,
angles.
I like symmetry. So the first designs were very kind of geometric and shapes and all that stuff. And then...
So by chance, divine appointment, I was able to make contact with a gentleman who lived in Arthur, married a woman from Arthur. They lived in Arthur for part of the year. He was originally from, I believe, Switzerland,
yeah.
And was a director of one of the bigger zoos over there. And we got to sit down and meet with him, and he brought up the fact, hey, your drive-through is great because you have the different curves and you can put up some vegetation and barriers so people don't know what's going to be around the bend. Why don't you implement that same thing on the walk-through side of the park? And so he even took it a step further. He made kind of a little rough model for us to see what that would look like with curved paths, and kind of explained his reasoning. He actually had input in Disney's Animal Kingdom, and so we felt we needed to listen to that. We thought about it. Everything made a lot of sense to us, and so then that kind of altered our design, which is great in the long run, but it made Rockholm even more daunting because all of Rockholm's paths were straight lines, were angles, and so we had to remove...
Probably about 95% of the pathways had to be removed.
And then, in case anyone is not familiar with Rockholm Gardens, the best way I describe it to somebody is a mix between a rock and botanical garden and an Amish theme park without roller coasters. So tons of flowers, tons of rock structures done back kind of during the Great Depression era. But then in the 70s, when the Yoder family bought it, they really added the Amish component, turned it into a tourist attraction. So it was huge in the 80s, early 90s. I think we're the 5th owners of the property possibly since then. And it had kind of been going downhill to the point where it closed down for almost 2 years before we bought the property. There were multiple buildings on site that just were not able to be kept up, and so when we got the property, it had buildings that roofs collapsed, there's water damage, different things all over, so we did have to take out some of the buildings, which definitely helped open up the property, put more focus on the trees and the grass, and be able to see through things, which made it a lot easier for us to do the bigger habitats that we wanted to do. So our big thing is, if we can't provide a better home for an animal than where it came from, we have no business having that animal, and we really want to focus on quality of life versus quantity of animals. So we kind of knew what we wanted the habitat sizes to be before we found out even what USDA's requirements are, and so ours far and exceed their requirements. We could have fit a lot more animals in the walkthrough area, but again, we wanted people to come here and realize that these are way bigger habitats than what you'd find at a zoo.
Well, we had issues with customers actually coming up, and I don't like saying complaining, but kind of wondering if there's any animals in some of our habitats, because the size of them is bigger than what they need to, and especially if you're dealing with a smaller animal that likes to hide sometimes, it might be a little bit of a challenge to find that animal. But more so in the beginning, we were having a few people come up and ask, hey, is there even an animal in here? And
I think some people even made the comment, the habitats are too big, you should make them smaller.
Yeah. So to us, that was kind of a good indicator that we were kind of doing what we kind of set out initially to do, because from a USDA standpoint, there are some requirements that seem like they should be bigger than what they actually are, just for when we first read them and stuff. So we were kind of both shocked that, in order to pass their kind of their codes and all that stuff, that the sizes of things seemed like smaller than what they should be. But so I remember, especially in that first year, there was quite a few people kind of saying those comments about your habitat should be a little smaller.
So we had about 60 days from when we started looking at the property to when we actually closed on it. And during that time, we were coming up with a pretty detailed to-do list. So like the day my wife and I were in Champaign doing the closing, as soon as it was done, Andy and Bobby, and then Daniel's an Amish guy who's been with us from the very beginning. He's become our adopted brother. So I usually tell people I have 3 brothers. They were here, and we got started that day, and it was...
Well, why don't you back up a little bit? It was about a week before we would get the keys. He comes over, I was over at my mom and dad's house. It was an evening. He comes over saying, oh, by the way, our first group of animals is coming the 3rd week of September. So we got the keys to the property September 1st. So we basically had 3 weeks to build the entire drive-through and get it completely enclosed for animals in 3 weeks.
But it gets better than that, because at the time there was no supplier of 12-foot fence posts, and so we had to get them from a lumber yard in Ohio, and they'd been ordered, but they were delayed, so the fence posts didn't even arrive until I believe September 10th.
Yeah.
So animals, first group of animals coming in September 22nd, fence posts arrived September 10th. We'd never put up fencing before. We'd seen kind of how it had been done.
Well, and like what needed to be fenced in was about between 18 and 20 acres is what our drive-through is. So anyone that knows anything about acreage, that's a lot of fence to put in, not only for newbies. I mean, for basically Daniel had an experience that helped tremendously, but that would be a lot of fence to put in even for someone that semi does that on a regular basis. So there was a lot. I mean, the first year itself was 80 plus hour weeks, but those first few weeks were starting at 5 o'clock in the morning and not finishing till 7, sometimes 8 o'clock in the evening time. And that's strictly just because we had a deadline. As we kind of talk about stuff, that'll be a running theme. Usually we aren't in a position to where we are waiting on something to come in. It is usually comes from this person, tells us, oh yeah, by the way, we need this done by this time, and we are in the 5th hour.
I've learned we work better under pressure, so that's when we excel.
But see, the problem is he's usually in his office radioing that to us, and we're out actually trying to get it done. So that's where the confusion and frustration comes sometimes. But we were able to get. I mean, basically
we got it done with I think 3 or 4 days to spare even. And
yeah, so
when we started, we were talking about we just fence in 1 5-acre portion, and we ended up being able to get the whole thing done.
The whole thing, yeah. And we would have done this. So we had animals in the drive-through before the company that put in the gravel pathway, the mile-long pathway that's out there, before that was even put in. So another kind of theme on some of our contractors that we've had work here is they don't work in normal working conditions. So like that group had to not only watch out for gates as they open and close, bringing semi-loads of rock in, dirt out, making sure animals didn't get out. They also had to be aware of what animals were around them, especially if they were out kind of walking around in the drive-through. Because that first group of animals, I mean, we had the camels were out there, the zebra, at least Tobias was out there. Water buffalo. So, I mean, there wasn't just, some llamas and a couple horses out there. There were some animals that, if you're not paying attention and they're in the right sort of mindset, they can do quite a bit of damage to you. So, it was a little interesting in terms of getting that kind of all worked out with that local company that kind of came and put those roads in, having to do it inside with other animals. Perfect world, all that would have been done before there was even any sort of animals out there.
But we had the path is done and everything was ready to go. We were planning to open the drive-through up in October so we could at least start generating some income and USDA had some internal issues going on, and so they were not able to come out until January to inspect our property. So we weren't able to open up the drive-through until March, and then that was a pretty rainy spring, so that delayed some of our walkthrough stuff. So the walkthrough opened 4th of July weekend. So
Yeah, it was originally, according to you, you'd originally wanted it open Memorial Day, and then I had to step in
Well, the rain
and kind of
came.
tell you
the rain came.
it's not possible.
The rain came and made us have to delay. But got the park open. We just had our 5-year anniversary of everything being open a couple months ago, and we at this point we have a little over 200 animals, probably over 75 different species. We usually see people from all 50 states here each year, and then usually 25 plus other countries as well.
Yep.
So most of them are not coming here specifically for us, at least not yet. So some of those countries are coming from the different universities or family that are visiting, that they bring them out there. And so we've been very humbled by the fact that pretty much 95 to 98% of the people that come out here absolutely love it, have an amazing time.
Well, that's something we've always strived for. Being a family-owned business, we always wanted that kind of friendly environment. Customer service is a big thing for us, so that's something that we've always kind of strived on to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that our guests have the best sort of experience that they can have. Kind of the biggest thing that I think of is just like our wagon tours. In the very beginning, and still to a certain extent, so my dad would have been a driver, and unfortunately he has that mindset that the customer, he focuses so much on the customer that sometimes he forgets about the safety of himself. So there was a few times whether a kid would knock off a sippy cup, or there's shoes that were falling off the wagon, and he was dead set to make sure that that did not ruin that kid or that family's time out on the wagon. And so I think he has had some close calls with some water buffalo, like Tobias, the zebra, as basically it kind of came down to the point where I had to be the guide on his wagon. In terms of him being the driver, I was the guide mainly so I could just make sure that he stayed on the tractor. But gives you a little bit of glimpse of, in the beginning there, pretty much from an employee standpoint, I mean, we had Dad, Mom, Kelsey to a certain extent, I mean, Bobby, pretty much family was running. I was trying to run as much as possible, just again, like he had said earlier, to try to get everything open so we could start kind of getting our name out there, start bringing some money in. So that's kind of what helped create that family kind of environment, atmosphere, and then it's just kind of carried over the years in terms of bringing on new part-time people, kind of instilling that in their training and stuff like that, making sure that, like I said, the guests always have the best time they could possibly have. And I feel like that's really one thing that has always stood out in terms of with our reviews or anything like that, that people do acknowledge that and appreciate that sort of thing. So
Yeah, and just the biggest thing is we are providing an experience that people can't get anywhere else really in the state. We are Illinois' first and only drive-through park, and we have people, Chicago land area is a big draw for us. We have people coming down to us. There's zoos up there, but they, especially like our behind the scenes or our wagon adventure, are things that they can't experience other places, and so they have the time of their life when they come down and love it, and they tell their family and friends, and we have a ton of people that come back and do the tours and adventures every year.
I think the other biggest thing in terms of where the park is now as opposed to what it was in the beginning. In the beginning, just like how we were kind of newbies with the fencing, that was kind of across the board to a certain extent. Like I said, touching back on our backgrounds and stuff, we had the passion for it, but we needed help. So, I mean, that's when we were local vets, Daniel was a big help in terms that he was raised on a farm and stuff like that, so he kind of knew the ins and outs of working with animals to a certain extent. He'd raised camels, so he had a little bit of knowledge when it came to the exotic side of things. But the biggest thing is, once you finally get those few years under your belt and establishing a routine, establishing that experience with our particular animals, and that's when things start to really kind of change for the, I don't want to say for the better, but it's a little easier when it comes to the daily tasks, because now we do all of our vaccinations when it comes to the big, pretty much everything out in the drive-through and in the petting zoo area. So all the equine species, camelids, deer, everything like that, we're able to do that. We're able to position ourselves with investing in certain pieces of equipment that we've been able to start taking on things that in the first year or two, we would always have to have a vet come out. And whether that was actually the vet kind of knocking down an animal so he could safely do hoof work or anything like that, we kind of invested the money that we needed to invest in the right pieces of equipment, so where we can not only ourselves do that, but also do it to where we don't actually have to have a vet come out and actually anesthetize an animal to knock him down to do a simple thing like hoof work that needs to be done on a semi-regular basis throughout the years. On top of that, just being able to establish the relationship with our animals. So now, like a perfect example, a couple of years ago, Charlie, our big male water buffalo, one morning both me and Daniel knew something wasn't quite right. He wasn't coming up to eat like he normally does, and he wasn't necessarily acting bad or anything like that, but he just wasn't acting normal. So went ahead, had the vet come out later that day, and come to find out it was the very early start of a respiratory type of infection that he was having. So something like that in those first years, we might not even have noticed it, but being able to establish relationships with all of our animals, we've been able to pick up on their attitudes and catch a lot of those things, preventative type of things that have kind of just made life a lot simpler. Getting in a routine is another thing. In terms of every year we try to bend on the animal, deworm once to 3 times a year, just kind of depends on what that species is and what their needs are. So being able to kind of have those first couple of years to kind of do trial and error to a certain extent on what the right routine is, like I said, it's night and day compared to when you focus just on that part of the park from when we started to where we are now. I think when we do our inspections with USDA, a thing that's not as glamorous as a lot of other things at the park is paperwork. So with USDA and having to be a park that is licensed through them, regulated through them, there is a lot of paperwork when it comes to the animal side. So establishing a system in place so all of our animals have their own profile, have their own history of medical history, where they came from, everything like that. It's easily organized, easily able to be looked up. Probably the last few inspections, she has actually taken pictures of how we do certain things so she can relay that to other parks and places that she kind of oversees to kind of suggest, hey, you might want to try this aspect of it. So I always tell, kind of both me and him are in the agreement that because we don't necessarily have that background in this, we're able to look at things maybe a little different than what someone that maybe would have went to school for this sort of stuff, and kind of the option A that is a go-to option. There's easily 100 different other ways that you can do it, and so that gives us a little bit of an edge, not having that ingrained in us. That he touched base about thinking outside the box to a certain extent, and we've kind of applied that not only to designing stuff and bringing new attractions on, but also just kind of everyday type of things. So whether that's chores or whether that's a new design for a feeder for the petting zoo, it's kind of one of those things that just having that experience over those first couple of years and what we wish we would have done, we're now in a position that we're able to kind of go back, improve on some things, and at the same time continue to expand the park as a whole for the public.
And USDA has taken pictures of lots of stuff we've done, not just with the paperwork to
Oh,
share other places. He wanted to highlight the paperwork because he does the paperwork. So
Yeah, so I came in and took over the paper. He initially started the paperwork and it was an absolute nightmare. I took over the paperwork and
by nightmare, it just means not as detailed as he would like it to be. But I don't just sit in my office and play solitaire all day like you might think I do. So there's other aspects to running the park. But he does the paperwork now. USDA has made multiple comments about the paperwork and records are on par with the major large city AZA zoos, and so we have a great relationship with our USDA inspector, and so that has been huge and very, very helpful for us. So the future for Aikman Wildlife, we have 40 acres. We are kind of using a lot of that, except for maybe about 6 acres that we're working on expanding into right now. So once we're able to develop that, that'll kind of open up some space for some future habitats, big cats or something we've talked about from the very beginning, so they could play a part.
well, let's just back up a little bit. So from a design and layout phase standpoint, we change things all the time, whether it's for things that we've found out, research from other facilities that an animal we thought might work, might not work, or just simply the space that we have, we thought it was going to be good for something, and then it comes to find out it's for something else. So everything that we have designed has probably gone through at least 3 or 4 different phases and revisions of what it is now. And then we've also had things where we've completely built something out all the way, and then a year later, we completely take it down and do something completely different because, like I said, we weren't thinking of something, or it was just kind of one of those things that this actually works better for this site. So like everything we say now, we can say this is what the future is, but there's a good chance that like the second model that I built after the first one was completely non-existent anymore.
It did take a lot of persuading to get him to build a second model.
Yeah, so this one I think was a little quicker, maybe 150 hours, let's say. That model that's in the gift shop right now that people can see and gives you an idea of what the 40 acres here initially was going to look like. So it's basically a concept at this point because there's so many things that are outdated on it that at some point the whole thing will have to be completely redone. But I'm not doing that until the whole 40 acres is completely mapped out and no more revisions are going to happen. So,
but essentially we have 40 acres. We have 6 acres that we have not incorporated into the park, and then we also have different areas within the park, within the walkthrough side, that can be utilized much better or utilized kind of for the first time, that will allow us to bring on some potentially new animals into the park as well. And then just opened up last year, did a new big addition to it this year. Opened at Easter is our Museum of Prehistoric Life. So I think at some point we'll probably do one of these podcasts and kind of focus solely on the museum, but it is something that definitely has the ability to expand and increase and grow in the future. We've got multiple life-size, I don't know what our number is, if you know that off the top of your head, multiple life-sized, fully fleshed out models of dinosaurs and prehistoric animals, to the point where we're probably on par number-wise with any other place in the country currently.
yeah, when it comes to fully fleshed out,
We'd have
animals.
5 more that would be coming to kind of finish phase 3, which would still be within the same footprint before we have to look at expanding. And so when those 5 come, we'd for sure be as many, if not more than anyone in the country, and potentially most other places around the world as far as size of the collection. And so our motto with that is don't settle for bones behind barriers. And so you go to a lot of museums, you see the fossils, you can't touch them. Here you see what the animal may have looked like You can go up, you can touch it. We encourage people to be as creative as they want to with pictures. Basically, you can do everything but climb on the pieces. And so we have pictures of kids sticking their heads in the different models' mouths. We probably have just as many adults sticking heads in mouths as the kids. And so if people want to see that, they can't see that anywhere else. So if we feel that can be a huge attraction and a draw that will be eventually becoming even bigger in the future.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what we would like to get to the point where the museum is kind of its own evolution in terms of growing, expanding, just like how the park started, and then the park continued to grow, expand. I mean, I think the big one that we're hoping in the next few years come into the park would be giraffe. I mean, giraffe is one of those animals that in the very beginning, like on the model that's in the gift shop that overlooks the whole property, there was an area that's down south that was designed for giraffe. We even built a building that was going to be able to house giraffe. And one thing led to another, and basically it just didn't make sense where the park was at back in the early days from a financial standpoint to try to bring on a giraffe or a couple giraffes. Especially now after we got a lot better handle working with our local vets and just the aspects of actually being able to not only bring a giraffe here and have a enclosure for it, the cost of that enclosure, but also the care of being able to provide the proper care a giraffe needs. A giraffe is probably wouldn't be comparable to any other animal that we have here or any animal that any of the local vets have kind of worked with before. So there's definitely, we wanted to kind of take our time with that and make sure that we weren't rushing anything when it came to that, because I mean, giraffes, they are financially a big investment, so we didn't want to jump the gun in that regard. And then just we have built relationships over the years with some other owners of some other wildlife parks around the nation, and we were able to kind of pull from them in terms of their experience. Some of them do have giraffes, so we have a better game plan than what we did initially in the very beginning when we thought, oh yeah, giraffes 100% would be so cool, not necessarily thinking about what the actual logistics are. But now it's kind of been brought back up. We have a kind of a different area in mind compared to where we were at. Some different designs for barns and that sort of thing that are more designed specifically for giraffes. In the beginning, we were just thinking male giraffes 18 feet tall, so we just need to make sure that our building is 18 feet tall so that it can go in the building. And there's, that's an oversimplification by any means of exactly what is involved with actually being able to properly handle and maintain a giraffe or a couple giraffes. So that probably be the biggest one, that once we get past this that 6 acres that he was talking about, kind of expanding that would probably be the big one that would be coming up from that's not a big cat or anything like that standpoint.
Yeah. So it's kind of the future of the park as of right now. Like you said, we make changes and tweaks and different opportunities present themselves, and so nothing is set in stone now, but we definitely are always thinking about things, dreaming about things, and so we have more ideas than what we can implement.
Yeah.
So definitely more to come on the future of the park and the museum. So some of the stuff that we are working on, this is obviously the first podcast we've done, and so we are wanting to come up with a name for that. Also looking at doing some kind of Q&A. So if you guys have questions that you would love to have answered, we would love to hear from you, as well as just really any comments or suggestions as to what we could do to improve the podcast, or topics that you'd love to hear discussed or want to know more information about. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and definitely would love to hear your feedback.
Later.